Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jimmy Dore Show. We have a special guest with us, Eva Bartlett. Now, she's a journalist with extensive experience. Well, she lived in Gaza from 2008 to 2013. We first became aware of her here at the Jimmy Dore Show when she corrected some lies about Syria at the United Nations press conference. And the biggest difference between her and the other journalists that she debunked at the press conference is that she's actually been to Syria. She went back recently, and she's here to give us an update. Please welcome to the show, Eva Bartlett. Hi, Eva.
Hi, Jimmy. Thank you so much for having me back on.
So when I first became aware of you, I saw you at that press conference, and I saw you school some journalists there who had never been there, who just repeat what the government says. And you kind of outed that these organizations that were bringing us the news about what's happening in Syria weren't actually even organizations. Like the one organization is just one guy in London who has no idea what he's talking about and things of that nature. Now, you recently went back to Syria, and tell me, why did you go back and what did you find?
I went back for a number of reasons, but most immediately was to go to the area of the alleged chemical attack that Western media and Western leadership allege occurred this year. And that area was Douma, Eastern Ghouta. And since all of Eastern Ghouta is now liberated from Jaish al-Islam and Falak ar-Rahman and the other terrorist factions that were there for years, it was possible to go to that area and to go to the field hospital in question. If people have seen the videos by the white helmets and other people that were filming on the day of the alleged attack, they would have seen this one hospital room, and they would have seen people being hosed down. And, these were allegedly victims of a gas attack. When I went there, I spoke with a medical student who was working that day. He was in a different ward, but he did come into the room shortly after. And basically what he summarized was that there was normal shelling. The Syrian army was fighting terrorism. Victims from shelling were coming in. They were having breathing difficulties. And then at some point, as doctors were treating them, he called them strange people. In other words, people that weren't known to them at the hospital came in shouting about chemical attacks, freaking people out. And so the doctors started hosing people down and eventually realized, wait a second, these people aren't exhibiting any of the signs of a gas attack. Their pupils are not, I think they should have been constricted, and they're not showing any of the other signs. So they stopped treating them for a gas attack and continued treating them for normal shelling, responses. And then they were dispatched home. And when I asked the medical student, Marwan Jaber, I said, were any of the doctors or nurses or staff on hand that day who were treating these alleged victims, who were told, Jimmy, I'm so sorry, we're told that these people were exposed to a deadly nerve agent, right? And this is why we went ahead and bombed Syria. This is what we're told. But yet none of the staff that were treating these alleged victims had any sort of symptoms, had any sort of ailments that you would have expected from staff who were treating alleged victims without protective clothing. So this is one in a many of realities that debunk the blatant lies that there was a chemical attack in Douma.
So now what you're reporting is confirming is what other people have reported. Robert Fisk reported the same thing. He interviewed doctors who said that the people weren't suffering from a chemical attack. What they were suffering from was hypoxia. And that was because the shelling, that they live underground, or they're in these underground tunnels. And when their shelling happens, and the shelling created a lot of dust. And that's what they were being treated for. And by the way, if you're chemically attacked, there's a lot of different things you would have to do to treat someone in a chemical attack. Like you'd have to wear protective clothing, things like that. Plus, they were not showing any of the signs. You'd have to get rid of their clothes off them. They didn't do any of this stuff that you would do in a real chemical attack. So, by the way, so Robert Fisk, who's an award-winning journalist, has debunked this. Now, you've been there. You've debunked this. One news network has also been there and has debunked this. So, and it has, as have others. But the CNN recently did an article where it said that this show peddles in conspiracy theories like the Douma, like the gas attacks in Syria were hoaxes, which we didn't say. We said they were false flags, which is a big difference. You're going to get smeared for saying this, Eva. Now, why do you think that is?
Because they can't handle the truth, Jimmy. I mean, was this not the same CNN that went to an area where alleged victims were and sniffed a backpack? There's a photo of her sniffing a backpack, determining that a chemical agent had been used. But when I was in Duma, I also walked on one of the main streets, and I interacted with civilians, and I spoke to them, and I asked them about life under the terrorists, but also, did they think there was a chemical attack? Because, hey, they live there, they work there, so they would have had an opinion, and their opinion was no. Their opinion was that it was, they thought it was just a ruse of the terrorists to frighten them from the Syrian government. I think we would probably agree this was a ruse from the Western powers that are backing the terrorists and the Gulf powers that are backing the terrorists in order to yet again try to find some sort of pretext for regime change in Syria. And I'm sure you've pointed it out on your show that this came like a week after Trump had announced that they would be withdrawing illegal American troops from Syria.
Correct. So tell us, what else have you seen in Syria that the mainstream news media is not reporting or reporting incorrectly?
In Duma and also other eastern areas of Ghouta that I went to, like Kafarbatna and Sakba, terrorist headquarters were connected to one another and to other buildings in the area by tunnels. Now, some of these tunnels I went through, and they were simply were literally just dug into the earth. So no, just basics, a simple tunnel to walk through. But others, especially under the Duma hospital, were elaborate and very well fortified. And it seems, I'm not an expert, and it certainly needs to be researched and investigated, but it seems like these terrorists, many of whom are not very well educated people that joined different terrorist brigades for power and money, it seems like perhaps they had outside help in constructing these tunnels. And the tunnels effectively enabled them to remain below ground. So they would go up above ground, fire their Hell cannon-fired gas canister bombs and mortars and missiles on the civilians of Damascus, killing at least 11,000 civilians in Damascus over the years. And then they would go back underground and evade being targeted by the Syrian or Russian forces. So, I mean, I think that's pretty notable because they were also using civilians as hostages. And when Ghouta was being liberated, we saw scenes of civilians protesting against the presence of the terrorists. And the terrorists fired. We were told by civilians' testimonies that terrorists were firing upon them. And when I went to a camp for internally displaced Syrians, the camp is in an area called Harjile. I talked with Syrians from these different areas, from Kafr Batna, from Hamouria, from other areas that when Ghouta was being liberated, these people were saying, we tried to flee, but they prevented us. And when I talked to them, they said the same thing. They also spoke of executions in public squares, of people being assassinated point blank or having their head chopped off with a sword by the moderates that we are told should be ruling Syria.
Yes. So what people don't realize is that when the United States government refers to moderate rebels, that first of all, that's like being a little bit pregnant. They're not moderate, right? They're literally trying to overthrow a government, and they're terrorists. What they really are, they're terrorists, and what the United States and we revealed it many different ways. That the United States has been, and the CIA has been propping up who we consider to be terrorists in Syria. We consider al-Nusra to be terrorists. We consider ISIS to be terrorists, Al-Qaeda, and we've been funding and propping them up because they want to overthrow the government in Syria. Now, there's a couple of different reasons why they want to do this. One is there's a pipeline that they want to put through Syria so they can sell natural gas to Europe. And that's why Russia doesn't want this to happen, because they want to sell natural gas to Europe. So they're friends with Syria. Now, what do the Syrian people think why the United States wants to overthrow Assad? Has anybody told you what they think it's about?
Many people have. On my last visit in June 2017, I remember particularly a conversation in Homs one evening when I ran into a group of random Syrians sitting on the sidewalk drinking tea. And they very clearly said essentially what you've just said, Jimmy. They don't believe it was a popular uprising, and they don't believe that any of these Western governments have Syrian civilians' best wishes as their prime concern. They know that this is a plot. And I've encountered Syrians, in other areas, in Aleppo, in Latakia, and in Damascus, of course. Syrians are actually very well informed. When I should mention, when I was in all these places, in addition to asking about the lives under terrorist rule, the lives for civilians under terrorist rule, I asked them specifically, did they know of the white helmets? And this ties in because as the terrorists are backed by the West, so is this entity known as the white helmets that we're meant to believe is intermixing with civilians and saving civilians. And yet people either said, we don't know because they wouldn't let us near them, or they said flat out, well, they're Jaish al-Islam or they're Falak ar-Rahman. We see them one day in military uniforms and we see them also in their white helmets. And in Sakba, there was a major white helmet center comprising two buildings. One was for their communications and the other was for their vehicle storage. And the vehicles included vehicles they had stolen from the Syrian government. And now I refer to my friend and colleague, Vanessa Beeley, who took a testimony. She was there some days prior to me. And her testimony included an old man saying that the fire truck in that particular building, that fire truck had been stolen from the Syrian civil defense, the real Syrian civil defense. And the man had murdered the actual fire truck driver who was going out to put out a fire. He murdered the actual Syrian civil defense person and then stole his fire truck. And this is not the first time we've heard these things. But also they or the terrorists they lived in close proximity with or were, they burned the facility before they left because instead of staying with civilians in Ghouta, as you would expect neutral rescuers to do, they went with terrorists to Idlib. And before leaving, they burned the building that was holding the different vehicles. And the building that was holding the vehicles was connected to the communications building by a tunnel. And that was connected to the terrorist bomb factory roughly 200 meters away by a tunnel also. And in that factory, I could see just untold massive numbers of missiles, of mortars, and the actual hell cannon thing that is used to fire gas canisters that are modified into bombs onto civilian areas. So it could not be clearer the ties between the white helmets and, in this case, it was Falak ar-Rahman, the white helmets and the terrorists. It couldn't be clearer.
So a lot of people have also reported about the white helmets, that they are not who they claim to be, that they're working we had Carla Ortiz on our show, who is a documentary filmmaker who was there, and she has film evidence of how the white helmets, their headquarters would be right next to, feet away from al-Nusra headquarters, and that there was lots of commingling, and you go into a white helmet's headquarters and they'd have, terrorist flags on the walls and things like that. And so, I mean, it's just any objective reporter who's been there, has an opinion about the white helmets always come down on the side of the white helmets are not who they are presented to be. But in fact, they're working with the terrorists to overthrow the Assad government. They're not these neutral observers who are trying to help people, correct?
Correct. And I also went back to Aleppo on a very brief visit, just interested to see how things had developed over, a year and a half since it was liberated of these different terrorist factions. And one of my interests was going to the Citadel and seeing the life there. But also I went to the Ansari district of Aleppo, where there was a White Helmet Center. And just like you're saying, Jimmy, it was a school formerly, and now thankfully it's been restored to being a school. But it was just next door to Al-Qaeda and then another terrorist brigade, all in the same area. And I was with Syrian journalist Khalid Escaif, who told me this is where they filmed The Last Men in Aleppo, which I admit I have not seen because I cannot bear the propaganda. But also, he said, he pointed down the road and roughly 50 or maybe 30 meters down the road, he said, this is where they executed the Palestinian boy Abdullah Isa, Nuruddin al-Zinki, down the road from the White Helmets headquarters.
So was it a 12-year-old boy they beheaded?
Yes.
Yeah, that was pretty gruesome. So, what else do you have to report from your trip to Syria that I'm not asking you about?
Oh, well, I went to Dara, which is south of Damascus. And my reason in going to Dara was that when events began in March 2011, Al Jazeera and all the corporate media were telling us that innocent, unarmed protesters were being gunned down by savage Syrian security forces. And I'd already interviewed somebody who was serving as a soldier and sent to Dara in years past. But I wanted more corroboration of his story, which was that no, in fact, security forces had batons and they were being gunned down by protesters who had weapons. So when I went, I spoke with a local priest in Dara who said he saw protesters firing on other protesters. And I spoke with other civilians in Dara. And I also I went around the town because with all the concern we're told Western leadership and Western media have for hospitals and schools being attacked, I haven't heard them once report on the school in Dara that I saw that has been severely shelled, and that when I was standing taking photos of the school and talking to a local explaining about the children that had been martyred in the over 50 mortar attacks on the school, this civilian, I was told to step into the school walls because literally 150 meters down the lane was a sniper, the edge of the secure area where snipers were. And to get to the state hospital, you have to go along 2 roads exposed to terrorist snipers 150 meters away. And the hospital itself has been attacked by shelling and also by sniping. So, for example, the wards, the gynecology ward, the children's ward, the operations ward of the hospital are all off limits because of the snipers.
Wow. Well, that's, that fits the mold of what we've been hearing. And, the terrorists, they take over hospitals, they take over schools. And then they say, oh, look, Assad is bombing schools, right? Isn't that what's happening?
That's what they say, yes.
Yeah. And the reason most likely is that, well, the terrorists have taken over the school, right?
Absolutely. If you remember in Aleppo, the area that Bana al-Abid lived in, Bana the child wonder, and actually I think this is an important point to mention, and I forgot to do so, regarding the chemical weapons allegations, I believe it was 17 Syrians from Duma were taken to The Hague and given their testimony about what really occurred. And one of those people was a boy named Hassam Diab. And the media afterwards, Western corporate media, basically said, well, his testimony is not credible. He's being forced. He's just a child. He's being coerced. And this is the same media that bought the story of then 7-year-old Bana al-Abid, who was apparently tweeting in insane amounts from eastern Aleppo under military siege about Russia and Syria committing Holocaust, et cetera, et cetera. So they're happy to believe this little child propagandist and that she's being exploited, but not a child that's actually saying, no, I wasn't gassed, and here's what happened.
Right.
But in Bana's area, her family was surrounded by Al-Qaeda and other terrorist headquarters, and they specifically did use schools because the schools were reinforced, and they would use them as headquarters and underneath prisons for the civilians that they would try and execute or maim.
That 7-year-old girl who was tweeting in perfect English, and she had great internet service in the middle of a war zone, which was a couple of red flags, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, but you made me remember the day before I went to Dara, I interviewed a doctor, Dr. Amr Gamtus, who was working in a military hospital roughly 40 kilometers from Dara in March 2011. And his interview was amazing. And I've got so many things to upload and many to get translated and subtitled. But he said, and in English, he said, when things were happening, the hospital he's working in, the general there told staff, treat civilians first. This is a command, because there might be civilian injuries, and before soldiers get treatment, civilians get treatment. He said there were so many doctors on staff that day, he was sitting in a room drinking coffee and watching TV, which happened to be Al Jazeera. And he said that Al Jazeera was reporting the hospital refused to treat civilians. This is not true. And Al Jazeera was live streaming from the hospital somehow. And so he believed it was one of the women in one of the hospital rooms live streaming from her phone. Now, I'm not a tech person, but what kind of phone would one need to have to live stream from a rural area of southern Syria in 2011?
You'd need some kind of a satellite phone, correct?
I would guess so, because I think I made the point recently. I've now finally upgraded to the modern world and got myself a Samsung 7. So with that phone, I really don't think I could have live streamed using the Syrian mobile data. So what was this woman or this person live streaming using, and how did she or he get it?
Okay, I hear. What's your suspicion?
My suspicion is that, well, it's not just a suspicion. I've had Syrians tell me that there was training ongoing before 2011 on how to take videos, say that they upload to YouTube, all these hashtags and things that most Syrians and myself even weren't familiar with in 2011. I had one Syrian friend tell me specifically he was taken to training with a bunch of random Syrians and given this training for about a week. I think it was held in Sweda, southeast of Damascus, before March 2011. And given all that we know about this being a premeditated war on Syria and about Dara not being fully peaceful and about there being a weapons storage under the Omri Mosque prior to the protest, I think it's safe to assume that there were some people that were trained and there were some people that were given equipment that would enable them to live stream.
Okay. Eva Bartlett reporting, she's been there. She's been to Syria. She just got back from her second trip. That was we spent 3 weeks there?
Just under 3 weeks, yeah.
And, well, she's, again, confirming all the things we've been reporting here, which is nice to hear. So, Eva Bartlett, where can people find more of your stuff?
On my blog, ingaza.wordpress.com, on Facebook, Eva Kareen Bartlett, and on Twitter, Eva K. Bartlett. And I do have a Patreon. I keep all my content open, but if you want to support me, that is always welcome.
Okay, fantastic. Everybody check out Eva Bartlett's work. It's fantastic. Thanks for being our guest, and thanks for doing the courageous work you've been doing.
Thank you so much, Jimmy.
Our next live Jimmy Dore show is July 1st in Portland, Oregon, and July 15th in Chicago, Illinois. We're doing a live show July 15th in Chicago, Illinois. Go to a link right there for all the tickets to all the live Jimmy Dore shows. Plus, if you can help become a premium member, we give you hours of bonus material every week. Become a patron or a premium member. And if you're on Steam It, we're steaming it right now. Plus, every Saturday, we do a live Super Solid Chat Saturday where it's a live stream and you can ask us questions and we'll answer them back every Saturday, 2 p.m. Pacific time. Thanks for your support.